A lioness approaches a photographer in the heart of the Okavango Delta, her golden eyes full of desperation. At first, it seems like an unusual encounter, until the photographer realizes the lioness isn't just wandering, she's asking for help. Driven by an unshakable instinct, the lioness leads her deep into the wilderness, where the shocking truth awaits. What could compel this wild predator to trust a human? And can they work together to save a life before it's too late? This extraordinary tale of trust, survival, and the fragile bond between humans and nature will leave you speechless. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun cast long shadows across Natalia Cruz's campsite as she carefully packed her camera equipment. Dew sparkled on the canvas of her tent, and a light mist hung over the Okavango Delta like a delicate veil. After a month of photographing wildlife, her memory cards were full of incredible shots, but her heart felt heavy about leaving this magical place that had become like a second home. "Just one more shoot," she whispered to herself, checking her camera settings with practiced ease. The familiar weight of her favorite lens brought comfort as she organized her gear beside the dying embers of her campfire. The scent of wood smoke still lingered in the cool morning air. A movement caught her eye. Natalia's breath caught in her throat as she spotted a lioness emerging from the tall grass at the edge of her camp. Her hands trembled slightly as she slowly lowered her camera bag to the ground. Years of experience told her to remain still, to avoid any sudden movements that might trigger the predator's hunting instinct. The lioness, whom Natalia would later name Shani, didn't display the typical aggressive behavior she'd witnessed in territorial lions. Instead, she paced back and forth, her movements deliberate and careful, almost hesitant. A soft growl rumbled from her throat, but it wasn't threatening. It held a different note, almost like a plea. Her golden eyes kept shifting between Natalia and something in the distance, filled with an intelligence that made Natalia's skin prickle. "What are you trying to tell me?" Natalia murmured, her photographer's instinct kicking in as she studied the lioness's body language, noting every twitch of muscle and flick of tail. Shani took a few steps away from the camp, then turned back to look at Natalia, her ears perked forward attentively. The big cat's behavior was unlike anything she'd seen in her career. Another low, guttural growl emerged as Shani began walking away, pausing every few steps to glance over her shoulder as if making sure Natalia understood the message. Natalia's heart raced as she realized what was happening. "You want me to follow you, don't you?" The words came out barely above a whisper, carried away by the morning breeze. Everything she knew about wildlife safety screamed against the idea, but something in the lioness's demeanor spoke of urgency rather than threat. There was an almost human-like desperation in those amber eyes. With trembling fingers, Natalia grabbed her camera, clutching it like a lifeline. She began following Shani, maintaining a respectful distance. The morning dew soaked through her boots as they walked through the grass, each step taking her further from the safety of her camp and deeper into the lion's world. Signs of disturbance became apparent as they moved deeper into the brush. Lion tracks marked the earth, broken twigs snapped under her feet, and patches of grass lay flattened in clear paths. Small birds scattered at their approach, their warning calls echoing across the savanna. Shani led her to a shallow ravine where she stopped and turned toward Natalia with an intense gaze that seemed to pierce straight through her. Taking a cautious step forward, Natalia peered down into the ravine. Her hand flew to her mouth as she gasped. There, lying on his side, was a massive male lion. His golden mane was matted with dirt and blood, and his breathing appeared labored, each breath causing his mighty chest to shudder. Deep wounds marked his hindquarter, the distinctive pattern of crocodile teeth evident in the injury. telling the story of a brutal fight at the water's edge. "Oh my God," Natalia breathed, understanding flooding through her like ice water. Shani had sought her out deliberately, looking for help. The lioness moved closer to the injured male, Mosi, and let out a soft, mournful sound that made Natalia's heart ache. In that moment, the boundary between human and animal seemed to blur, united by a shared concern for a life hanging in the balance. Natalia's hand shook slightly as she raised her binoculars, her breath catching at the sight of Mosi's massive form lying motionless in the ravine. His golden mane was matted with mud and dried leaves, and his chest barely moved with each shallow breath. The crocodile bite on his hindquarter looked angry and swollen, the flesh around it an alarming shade of red. "Oh no," she whispered, lowering the binoculars with unsteady hands. Shani sat nearby, her tail twitching anxiously as her eyes fixed on Natalia with an intensity that made her heart ache. The lioness's trust felt like both a precious gift and an overwhelming burden. The morning heat pressed down like a heavy blanket as Natalia wrestled with her thoughts. As a wildlife photographer, she lived by the code of non-interference. Nature should take its course without human meddling. But looking at Mosi's wounded body and Shani's pleading eyes, that code suddenly felt cold and distant, like an abstract rule made by people who'd never faced such a moment. Natalia pulled out her satellite phone with trembling fingers, trying to reach the ranger station. The screen flickered with one weak bar of signal, taunting her with the possibility of help just out of reach. Come on, she muttered, pacing along the ravine's edge, kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. The call failed 3 times, each attempt increasing her frustration until she wanted to throw the useless device. Her mind flashed back to Bolivia 2 years ago, a young jaguar caught in an illegal trap. She'd filmed it, following the documentary's strict non-intervention policy, her camera capturing every painful moment. The cat's eyes had haunted her dreams for months after it died, those amber orbs filled with pain and confusion. She'd told herself it was the right thing to do, but the memory still made her stomach twist with guilt and regret. "I can't do that again," she said firmly, tucking the satellite phone away in her vest pocket. "Not when help is possible. Not this time." Natalia remembered the stories about Dr. Kamau Ndlovu, a respected wildlife veterinarian who worked in the area. She'd never met him, but local guides spoke highly of his expertise and dedication, particularly his careful approach to wildlife intervention. Walking quickly back to her vehicle, Natalia felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her shoulders. The sun was climbing higher in the cloudless sky, and time felt precious, slipping away like water through her fingers. At her Land Rover, she paused and looked back toward the ravine. Shani remained vigilant beside Mosi, her golden form catching the morning light like a statue carved from amber. "I'll be back," Natalia promised softly, climbing into the driver's seat. "Hold on, both of you. Just hold on." The ranger station was a modest building with peeling paint and a rusty tin roof, the kind of weathered outpost that had seen decades of sun and storms. Inside, 2 uniformed rangers listened to Natalia's story with raised eyebrows and crossed arms, their skepticism evident in every line of their faces. "A lioness led you to her injured mate?" The taller ranger exchanged skeptical glances with his colleague, running a hand through his graying hair. "Ms. Cruz, we get many foreign journalists here looking for dramatic stories, trying to sensationalize our wildlife." "This isn't about a story," Natalia insisted, her voice firm despite her frustration. Her hands gripped the edge of their desk. "There's an injured lion who needs help. Please, I just need to find Dr. Kamau Ndlovu. Time is critical." The shorter ranger sighed, adjusting his badge. Dr. Kamau's clinic is about 20 kilometers east, just past the old baobab grove. But I should warn you, he doesn't like interfering with nature's way. He probably won't help. He's turned away similar requests before. Natalia nodded her thanks and hurried back to her vehicle, the gravel crunching under her boots. The sun beat down mercilessly as she navigated the rough track, her thoughts churning like the dust clouds behind her wheels. Every bump and jolt reminded her of Mosey lying in that ravine, fighting for his life, waiting for help that might never come. Was she doing the right thing? The question nagged at her as she drove, weighing heavily on her conscience. She could already imagine the headlines. Photographer's dramatic lion rescue. Her fingers tightened on the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. No, this wasn't about her career or getting the perfect shot. This was about saving a life that mattered, about keeping a promise to a desperate mother. A figure waving by the roadside caught her attention. She slowed down, recognizing Kofi Mensah's familiar smile. He wore his usual khaki guide's uniform, the fabric dusty from the day's work, looking surprised to see her. "Natalia, I thought you'd left the Delta by now." His smile faded as he noticed her tense expression, the worry lines around her eyes. "What's wrong?" She quickly explained about Shani and Mosi, watching Kofi's face grow serious. "The lions are sacred to my people," he said quietly, his voice taking on a reverent tone. "They represent strength and protection. If Shani trusted you enough to ask for help, that means something. It's a sign we can't ignore." "Will you come with me to Dr. Kamau's clinic?" Natalia asked, hope creeping into her voice. "I could use the support." "Of course," Kofi replied, climbing into the passenger seat. "I know Dr. Kamau. He's a good man, but very set in his ways. Having someone who knows the local customs might help. Plus, he and I have worked together before." They drove the final stretch in companionable silence until a small thatched roof building appeared ahead, nestled among towering acacia trees. A wooden sign read, "Wildlife Veterinary Clinic," in fading letters, the wood weathered by years of harsh sun. Natalia parked under an acacia tree, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the scorching afternoon heat. "Ready?" Kofi asked gently, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Natalia nodded, squaring her shoulders. She'd come too far to turn back now. Mosey's life depended on what happened next, and she was determined to make this work. The wooden door of Dr. Kamau's clinic creaked open, revealing a tall man with stern features and graying temples. His white coat was spotless despite the dusty surroundings, a testament to his meticulous nature. He studied Natalia with watchful eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Dr. Kamau, I'm Natalia Cruz." She stepped forward, her words tumbling out quickly, driven by urgency. "There's an injured male lion who needs urgent help. A lioness. She actually led me to him. It's extraordinary." Dr. Kamau's expression remained neutral, but his eyebrows lifted slightly, betraying a hint of interest. "Ms. Cruz, I know your work. You're that wildlife photographer from National Geographic. Your photos of the gorillas in Rwanda were remarkable." "Yes, but this isn't about getting photos," Natalia insisted, her hands gesturing earnestly. "The lioness, Shani, she came to my camp. She brought me to her mate. He has severe crocodile bites on his hindquarters. Without help, he won't survive." Inside the examination room, medical supplies lined the walls in neat rows, each instrument carefully arranged and gleaming. Dr. Kamau leaned against a metal table, his arms crossed over his chest, his posture revealing his skepticism. "Nature has its own way," he said quietly, each word measured and deliberate. "When we interfere, we risk disrupting delicate balances. The natural order exists for a reason." Kofi stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of local wisdom. Dr. Kamau, this pride is special to our community. They bring tourists, yes, but more importantly, they maintain the ecosystem's balance. Losing the male could destabilize the entire pride. The consequences could be far-reaching. Dr. Kamau's face darkened, shadows of past regrets crossing his features. 10 years ago, I saved a wounded elephant. It seemed like the right thing to do. He paused, his voice heavy with memory, fingers drumming against his arm. That elephant survived, but it became aggressive, destroying crops and threatening villages. 3 people died before it had to be put down. Sometimes our good intentions have terrible consequences. I carry that burden every day. On the clinic's wooden porch, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across their faces. Natalia faced Dr. Kamau directly, her determination evident in every line of her body. This is different, she urged, her voice passionate but controlled. This isn't about us imposing our will. Shani chose to seek human help. She showed trust in us. That has to mean something. Her voice softened, becoming almost gentle. I understand your concerns. That's why we need your expertise to assess the situation properly. We need your guidance to do this right. Dr. Kamau was quiet for a long moment, his internal struggle visible in his furrowed brow. Finally, he nodded, decision made. I will look at the lion, but understand this. If treatment risks more harm than good, or if his injuries are too severe, I walk away. Those are my conditions. No negotiations. Agreed, Natalia said quickly, relief flooding her face and loosening the tension in her shoulders. We'll take my truck, Dr. Kamau said, reaching for his medical kit with practiced efficiency. It has better equipment for treating large animals. We'll need every advantage we can get. Kofi helped gather additional supplies while Natalia explained the location in detail, drawing a rough map in the dust. Within minutes, they were loading the vehicle with medical equipment and emergency supplies, racing against the setting sun to reach Mosey in time. The truck's engine roared to life, echoing their sense of urgent purpose. The Land Rover bounced and swayed along the rutted track as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the golden savanna. Natalia gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white with tension, her eyes darting to her watch for the 10th time in as many minutes. The vehicle's suspension groaned with each bump and dip in the rough terrain. Behind her, Dr. Kamau's vehicle followed steadily, its precious cargo of medical supplies secured in the back. Tell me again about the bite marks. Dr. Kamau's voice crackled through the radio, tinged with professional concern. Were they concentrated in one area? Yes, Natalia replied, pressing the transmit button with slightly trembling fingers. Mainly on his right hindquarter. The crocodile must have grabbed him while he was drinking at the water's edge. Kofi, sitting beside her in the passenger seat, nodded thoughtfully, his weathered face creased with worry. Lions and crocodiles have shared these waters for generations, but this injury... He shook his head, his expression grave. It's not common for a lioness to seek human help like this. The sun dipped lower toward the horizon, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples that stretched endlessly above them. Through her dusty windshield, Natalia noticed movement in the distance. Several large shapes moving purposefully through the tall grass. Dr. Kamau, Kofi grabbed the radio, his voice tense with urgency. We have company. There's another pride at the territory boundary. They slowed their vehicles to a crawl, watching the distant lions with growing concern. 4 muscular females prowled along the invisible border of Mosey's territory, their intentions clear in every stalking step. This is worse than we thought, Kofi explained quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. If Mosey dies, these lions will take over. Shani's pride, the cubs, the younger females, They won't survive the takeover. It would be devastating. Natalia's hands tightened on the wheel until her fingers ached. What had seemed like saving one lion now felt like racing against time to save an entire family, their lives hanging precariously in the balance. They approached the ravine just as dusk began to settle over the landscape. Shani appeared from the grass like a golden ghost, her movements agitated and purposeful. She paced back and forth in front of them, watching their approach with intense golden eyes that seemed to glow in the fading light. Dr. Kamau parked several yards away, emerging slowly with his medical bag clutched carefully in one hand. Mosi lay where Natalia had last seen him, but his breathing seemed more labored now, his massive chest rising and falling with visible effort in the growing shadows. "Easy now," Dr. Kamau murmured in a soothing tone, approaching with measured steps. He kept his eyes fixed on Shani, reading her body language as she watched his every move with unwavering attention. Natalia lifted her camera, capturing the scene with quiet clicks that barely disturbed the evening air. The fading light cast long shadows across the ravine, while cricket songs and distant bird calls filled the air with nature's symphony. This wasn't about getting the perfect shot anymore. It was about recording a moment of extraordinary trust between species, a bridge between two worlds. Shani continued her nervous pacing, moving between Mosi and the humans with careful precision, her ears twitching at every sound from the darkening savanna. Her protective instinct was palpable, a testament to the deep bonds that held her pride together. The setting sun painted the savanna in deep oranges and purples as Dr. Kamau raised his binoculars. His weathered hands steadied the lenses as he studied Mosi's prone form, the shadows lengthening around them like dark fingers stretching across the grass. The male lion's chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, his powerful body unnaturally still against the russet earth. "The wounds are severe," Dr. Kamau said quietly, his voice heavy with concern. "Those are definitely crocodile bites. See how the teeth marks form that distinct pattern?" He pointed, showing Natalia through her own binoculars, tracing the air with his finger. "Without antibiotics and proper stitching, infection will set in quickly. The heat out here only makes it worse." Shani paced nearby, her muscular shoulders tense, her eyes fixed on Dr. Kamau. Her tail swished back and forth as she watched him assess her companion, her ears twitching at every small sound from the surrounding grassland. "We'll need to tranquilize him," Dr. Kamau continued, lowering the binoculars and rubbing his tired eyes. "But that comes with serious risks out here. The dart gun makes noise, and an unconscious lion is vulnerable to predators. Hyenas are especially bold at dusk." Kofi began unpacking the portable lights from the Land Rover, his movements careful and deliberate in the growing darkness. "We'll create a safe perimeter," he said, setting up the first light and testing its brightness. "It might help keep other animals away. I've seen it work before." Natalia checked her camera settings, adjusting for the failing light, her fingers moving automatically across familiar dials. She moved closer to Dr. Kamau, who stood lost in thought, his face etched with worry lines. "What's really holding you back?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Kamau sighed, his shoulders sagging slightly. "Human intervention changes things in ways we can't always predict. The medications, the bandages, they'll alter his scent. That rival pride we saw earlier?" He gestured toward the darkness beyond their circle of safety. "They'll smell the difference. They might see it as a sign of weakness and attack. I've seen it happen before." "But this is different," Natalia insisted, glancing at Shani, who had paused her pacing to watch them intently. "Look at her. She came to us for help. When has a lioness ever done that? This feels like something special." Dr. Kamau nodded slowly, his expression softening. You're right. In all my years, I've never seen anything like this. He reached for his medical kit and began preparing the tranquilizer dart with practiced hands, his movements quick but precise. A deep roar rolled across the darkening plain, making them all freeze in place. Natalia's heart hammered in her chest as she instinctively moved closer to the vehicles, her camera clutched tightly against her body. The sounds seemed to come from the direction where they'd spotted the rival pride earlier, echoing ominously across the savannah. Dr. Kamau's hands moved faster now, checking the dart gun with quick, efficient movements, his earlier hesitation replaced by urgent purpose. We're running out of time, he muttered, loading the dart with steady fingers. Whatever we're going to do, we need to do it now. The African night descended like a heavy curtain, bringing with it a chorus of cricket songs and distant animal calls. Dr. Kamau steadied his hands, carefully aiming the tranquilizer gun at Mosey's shoulder. With practiced precision, he squeezed the trigger. The dart found its mark with a soft thud. Shani's low growl rippled through the darkness, but she remained still, her eyes fixed on the humans. Natalia held her breath, her heart pounding against her ribs. Through her night vision binoculars, she swept the perimeter, searching for any movement that might signal the rival pride's approach. Nothing yet, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the nighttime sounds. Minutes ticked by slowly as they waited for the sedative to take effect. Mosey's breathing grew steadier, his massive body gradually relaxing into the earth. Dr. Kamau nodded, gathering his medical supplies. Now we work quickly, he said, approaching the sleeping lion with measured steps. Natalia followed close behind, her flashlight beam steady on Mosey's injured flank. The wound looked angry and swollen in the artificial light. Dr. Kamau's hands moved with careful efficiency as he cleaned the deep puncture marks. The crocodile's teeth missed the major arteries, he murmured, applying a thick layer of antibiotic salve. He's lucky. Natalia raised her camera, capturing the delicate operation in hushed clicks. The flash was off, using only the available light to document this extraordinary moment. Nearby, Shani paced, her ears twitching at every rustle in the undergrowth. The stitching process was meticulous. Dr. Kamau's fingers worked the curved needle through Mosey's thick skin, closing the wound one careful suture at a time. Kofi kept watch, his experienced eyes scanning the darkness beyond their circle of light. When the final stitch was tied, Dr. Kamau stepped back to examine his work. Shani moved closer to Mosey, her steps cautious but purposeful. She settled near his head, her posture alert despite her apparent calm. The jungle had grown unnaturally quiet, setting everyone's nerves on edge. Even the insects seemed to have fallen silent. Kofi touched Natalia's arm, pointing to the portable camp equipment in their vehicle. "We should stay," he whispered. "Set up a watch until morning." Dr. Kamau nodded in agreement, his eyes never leaving Mosey. "Yes, we can't leave them vulnerable tonight. Not with the rivals so close." They moved efficiently in the darkness, setting up a small camp within sight of the lions. The quiet of the night pressed in around them, broken only by Mosey's steady breathing and the occasional snap of a twig in the distance. Under the vast African sky, Natalia helped set up their modest camp within sight of where Mosey lay recovering. The soft glow of their battery-powered lanterns created a small circle of light in the darkness. Dr. Kamau arranged his medical supplies methodically, while Kofi distributed noisemakers, metal cans filled with rocks that would serve as makeshift alarms. "I'll take first watch," Natalia volunteered, gripping her flashlight. Her eyes kept drifting to Shani, who hadn't left Mosey's side. The Lioness's dedication touched something deep in her heart. As the hours crept by, they rotated shifts. During a quiet moment, Kofi's voice broke through the cricket chorus. You know, in our culture, lions aren't just animals, he said, warming his hands around a cup of coffee. They represent leadership, protection, and balance. Natalia leaned forward, intrigued. Tell me more. When a strong male like Mosey protects his territory, it creates stability, Kofi explained. The antelope herds know their patterns. The smaller predators respect boundaries. Without him, chaos would spread through the delta. Dr. Kamau, who had been silent, suddenly spoke. I've spent years trying to maintain professional distance, he admitted, his voice soft. But watching Shani today, she showed remarkable intelligence in seeking help. Perhaps I've been too rigid in my thinking about wildlife intervention. Natalia felt a surge of respect for the veterinarian's honesty. She watched Shani's silhouette in the darkness, marveling at the lioness's courage. We could learn so much from them about loyalty and protecting those we care about, she whispered. The peaceful moment shattered as a twig snapped in the darkness. Through her night vision scope, Natalia's breath caught. Several pairs of eyes glowed in the distance. The rival pride, she hissed urgently. Shani's growl rumbled through the night as she positioned herself between the threat and Mosi. Dr. Kamau quickly grabbed the powerful spotlight while Kofi readied the noisemakers. They formed a defensive line, knowing the next few hours would be crucial for Mosey's survival. The midnight air crackled with tension as low growls pierced the darkness. Natalia's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her night vision binoculars. Through the green-tinted view, she counted the shapes moving in the shadows. 3 of them, she whispered to Kofi. There's a big male leading them. Shani stood her ground at the territory's edge, her muscles taut and teeth bared. Her warning growl rumbled across the space between them. Behind her, Dr. Kamau crouched near Mosey's sedated form, his experienced hands checking the lion's breathing. The noisemakers, Kofi reminded softly. They grabbed the metal cans, shaking them to create a jarring clatter that echoed through the night. Their flashlight beams cut through the darkness, dancing across the grass. The rival pride's leader took another step forward, testing their resolve. Shani's answering roar was fierce and immediate. Just then, movement in the tall grass caught Natalia's attention. 2 more lionesses emerged from the shadows, their steps purposeful as they positioned themselves behind Shani. The sight made Natalia's heart leap. Reinforcements from Shani's pride had arrived. Look, Kofi whispered, his voice filled with hope. When the pride stands together like this, it sends a powerful message. The rivals might think twice now. Natalia kept her camera steady, documenting the scene without flash. The rival pride's body language began to change, their confident advance faltering as they assessed the growing opposition before them. For nearly an hour, the standoff continued. The rivals paced, tested, and finally retreated into the darkness. Their withdrawal was gradual. A few steps back, pause, then a few more, until their glowing eyes disappeared into the night. The tension broke like a fever. Natalia released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Dr. Kamau's quick check of Mosey confirmed what they'd hoped. The injured lion had remained stable through the confrontation. They're gone for now, Kofi said, lowering his flashlight. But they'll be watching, waiting. Natalia looked at Shani, still standing proud with her pridemates, and wondered how long they could maintain this delicate balance until Mosey recovered enough strength to defend his territory himself. The first hints of dawn painted the sky in soft purple hues as Natalia fought to keep her tired eyes open. A subtle movement caught her attention. Mosey's tail twitched, and his massive chest rose with a deeper breath than before. Her heart skipped a beat as she watched him slowly regain consciousness. Shani, who had kept vigil throughout the night, padded closer to her mate. With gentle movements that seemed impossible for such a powerful predator, she began to lick Mosey's face. Her rough tongue moved in careful strokes across his muzzle, a tender display of care that made Natalia's throat tight with emotion. Dr. Kamau crouched nearby, his experienced eyes analyzing every detail of Mosey's condition. "His breathing is stronger," he noted quietly. "The antibiotics seem to be working." Natalia raised her camera, capturing the intimate moment between the lions. The rising sun cast a golden glow across their fur, creating an almost magical scene of healing and hope. As the sun cleared the horizon, Mosey attempted to rise. His muscles trembled with effort, but his legs couldn't support his weight. He collapsed back to the ground with a frustrated grunt. "He needs more time," Natalia said, turning to Dr. Kamau. "We should stay another day." The veterinarian's face creased with concern. "I have other patients waiting at the clinic. Appointments I can't simply—" "Dr. Kamau," Kofi interrupted gently, "these lions are more than just animals to us. They bring tourists who support our local economy. They keep the antelope populations in check. When the lions thrive, everyone benefits." Dr. Kamau ran a hand across his face, considering Kofi's words. After a long moment, he nodded. "One more day," he agreed. "But we must be certain our presence isn't doing more harm than good." As the morning progressed, Natalia worked methodically to set up her hidden cameras around the perimeter. She carefully concealed each one in the brush, ensuring they would capture any approaching threats without being obvious. "I'll head to the village," Kofi announced, shouldering his bag. "The elders there keep track of lion movements. They might know something useful about this rival pride." "Be careful," Natalia called after him. "We'll see you this afternoon." Kofi smiled and nodded before disappearing down the path. Settling back in their observation spot, Natalia began reviewing her footage from the previous night. On her camera screen, she watched Shani's unwavering dedication to Mosey. The lioness hadn't left his side, except to warn off threats, displaying a level of devotion that touched Natalia deeply. She looked up from her camera to see Shani still maintaining her protective position near Mosey, her eyes alert despite her obvious exhaustion. The bond between these two magnificent creatures was undeniable, and Natalia felt privileged to witness it. The sun climbed high in the sky as Kofi's vehicle kicked up dust on its return. His face was serious as he approached the group gathered near the ravine. Natalia felt her stomach tighten at his expression. "The village is worried," Kofi said, wiping sweat from his brow. "They've noticed changes in the area. The rival pride has been pushing boundaries, coming closer to their livestock." Dr. Kamau looked up from his medical supplies. "How serious is the situation?" "Very. If Mosey's pride loses this territory, everything changes. The rival males will kill any cubs, drive the pride away. Without Mosey's pride keeping order, other lions might get desperate, hunt closer to villages." Kofi shook his head. "It's all connected." Natalia watched Shani nuzzle against Mosey's mane, her heart heavy with understanding. This wasn't just about saving one lion. It was about preserving a delicate balance that affected everyone in the region. As the sun reached its peak, they gathered under the sparse shade of an acacia tree near Mosey. Dr. Kamau knelt beside the big lion, carefully examining the stitched wound. His gentle hands moved with practiced precision as he applied more antibiotic ointment. "The healing has begun," he said softly. "Slow, but promising." Shani sat nearby, her eyes fixed on Dr. Kamau's every movement. Natalia marveled at the scene, a wild lioness allowing a human so close to her injured mate. She raised her camera, capturing the extraordinary moment. The quiet click of the shutter seemed to echo the trust that had formed between them all. Later, as afternoon heat shimmered across the landscape, Natalia climbed carefully up a sturdy termite mound. The red dirt crumbled slightly under her boots as she raised her binoculars. Through the powerful lenses, she scanned the distant tree line. Her breath caught when she spotted them, the rival pride. Their tawny bodies moved like shadows through the grass, their intentions clear in their stalking postures. "They're still out there," she called down to the others. "Watching, waiting. I think they're planning another attempt after dark." Kofi and Dr. Kamau exchanged concerned glances. They all knew what was at stake now. Not just Mosi's life, but the stability of the entire region. As Natalia climbed down from her perch, they gathered to plan their defense for the coming night. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the delta as Natalia, Dr. Kamau, and Kofi gathered under a large acacia tree to plan their strategy. The heat was intense, but their determination remained unshaken. "We need to create a stronger deterrent tonight," Dr. Kamau said, pulling out a map of the area. "The rival pride will be bolder after observing us." Kofi nodded, wiping his forehead with a bandana. "I can position the vehicles to create a barrier. The headlights will help maintain visibility." "What about noisemakers?" Natalia suggested, reaching into her equipment bag. "I have some battery-operated motion sensors that could startle them." Dr. Kamau considered this. "Good thinking. We'll set them up in a perimeter, but we'll need to take shifts again. No breaks in our watch." They spread out, gathering materials from their vehicles. Natalia strung up small bells between posts while Kofi positioned solar-powered lamps. The afternoon light began to fade as they worked, casting an orange glow across the landscape. Later, Natalia sat cross-legged near her tent, reviewing the footage on her camera's screen. The images were powerful. Shani's protective stance, Dr. Kamau's careful treatment of Mosi, the rival pride's threatening presence. Her finger hovered over the delete button for several clips that felt too sensational. "Struggling with what to share?" Dr. Kamau asked, sitting beside her. "Yes," Natalia admitted. "This story needs to be told, but I don't want to exploit them." "Too much exposure could bring unwanted attention," Dr. Kamau warned. "Sometimes well-meaning publicity does more harm than good." Natalia nodded solemnly. "I'll be careful. This isn't about getting dramatic shots. It's about showing the real connection between these animals." As dusk approached, movement caught their attention. Shani emerged from the grass, dragging a Thompson's gazelle. She approached Mosi's resting spot, dropping the prey near his head. The injured lion raised his head weakly, accepting the offering. Natalia watched, deeply moved, as Shani stayed close while Mosi ate small bites. Dr. Kamau observed with professional interest. "This is a good sign," he said quietly. "His appetite means he's fighting the infection." They finished setting up their defensive perimeter, vehicles positioned strategically, lights ready to illuminate any approach, noisemakers hidden in the grass. The sun dipped below the horizon as they prepared for another night of vigilance. The darkness settled over the delta like a heavy blanket, broken only by the steady sweep of Natalia's spotlight cutting through the night. From her position on the Jeep's roof, she methodically scanned the perimeter, her hands steady despite her racing heart. Below her, Kofi moved between the trees, pulling strings that set metal plates clanging against branches. The harsh sounds echoed across the landscape, creating an irregular rhythm that might keep predators at bay. "Everything quiet so far," Natalia called softly to Dr. Kamau, who crouched near Mosi with his tranquilizer gun ready. The veterinarian nodded, his usual stoic expression tight with concentration. Shani paced the edge of their makeshift camp, her muscular form a shadow against the deeper darkness. Her low growls carried on the night air, a warning to any who might approach. Hours passed in tense vigilance. Then Natalia's spotlight caught movement, several pairs of eyes reflecting in the darkness. Her breath caught as she recognized the massive form of the rival pride's leader emerging from the shadows. "They're back," she whispered urgently. "The big male is leading them." The rival lion stalked closer, his muscles rippling beneath his dark mane. Shani immediately stepped forward, her snarl fierce and challenging. Behind her, Mosi struggled to rise but fell back with a pained grunt. Natalia swung the spotlight directly into the approaching lion's eyes. He flinched, momentarily blinded, and shook his massive head in confusion. The rival male recovered quickly and charged forward with frightening speed. Kofi reacted instantly, slamming his hand on the vehicle's horn. The sudden blast of sound split the night. Dr. Kamau leapt to his feet, shouting with commanding authority. A sound so unexpected from the usually quiet man that even Natalia jumped. Shani seized the moment, lunging forward with teeth bared and claws extended. The rival lion hesitated, caught between his instinct to fight and the overwhelming sensory assault. After a tense moment, he backed away, retreating into the darkness with his pride following behind. Natalia released a shaky breath, her hands trembling slightly as she lowered the spotlight. Dr. Kamau's shoulders sagged with relief, while Kofi slumped against the Jeep's door. They had won this round, but the night was far from over. The pre-dawn air hung heavy with exhaustion as the group settled into an uneasy quiet. Dr. Kamau knelt beside Mosi, his experienced hands gently examining the wounded lion's flank. The stitches held firm, and the swelling had noticeably decreased. "His temperature is more stable now," Dr. Kamau murmured, standing up slowly. "The antibiotics are working." Natalia sat on a fallen log beside Kofi, both of them watching Shani maintain her vigilant guard. "I've never seen anything like it," Natalia whispered. "The way she sought us out, how she stood her ground against that rival pride." Kofi nodded, his eyes full of admiration. "Lions are known for their family bonds, but Shani—" He shook his head in wonder. "She's something special. Her courage has kept those other lions from claiming this territory." As the first rays of sunlight painted the sky in soft pinks and oranges, movement from Mosi caught everyone's attention. The injured lion shifted, his muscles tensing as he planted his front paws firmly on the ground. Slowly, trembling with effort, he pushed himself up. "Look!" Natalia breathed, instinctively reaching for her camera, but stopping herself, not wanting to disturb the moment. Mosi swayed on his feet, managing to stand for several seconds before his strength gave out. He collapsed back to the ground with a soft grunt. Shani was at his side instantly, gently nuzzling his face and neck with quiet rumbles of encouragement. Dr. Kamau watched the scene intently. "This is promising," he said, his usual reserve softening slightly. "Standing takes considerable strength. He's fighting back." As the sun climbed higher, Natalia gathered with Kofi and Dr. Kamau near their vehicles to discuss their next steps. The veterinarian glanced at his watch with concern. "I have patients waiting at the clinic," he explained, "but I can stay a few more hours to monitor his progress." "What if the rival pride returns?" Natalia asked, worry creasing her brow. Kofi stepped forward, gesturing toward the eastern section of the territory. "There's better cover in that direction, more places to hide. If Mosi can regain enough strength to move, even a short distance, it could give him the advantage he needs." They agreed to wait until mid-afternoon, hoping Mosi might show more signs of recovery. Natalia watched as Shani settled beside her injured companion, her protective presence unwavering. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ravine as the group prepared for another tense day of waiting and watching. The morning sun cast long shadows across the camp as Natalia and Kofi sat together, sharing coffee from a thermos. Steam rose from their cups, mixing with the crisp morning air. Their eyes never strayed far from Mosi and Shani, who rested nearby in the dappled shade. "You know," Kofi said, warming his hands around his cup. In our villages, we see lions as more than just animals. They're guardians of the land. He gestured toward Mosi. When the lions are healthy, everything stays in balance. The antelope, the grass, even the rivers seem to flow better. Natalia nodded, taking in his words. How do the local communities deal with living so close to them? It's not always easy, Kofi admitted, but we've learned to coexist. The lions keep the grazing herds moving, which prevents overgrazing. They're like nature's shepherds. Dr. Kamau approached Mosi carefully, medical kit in hand. Shani watched but remained calm as he examined the stitches. The wound is healing well, he reported, but he needs more time before we can think about moving him. As noon approached, they settled under a sprawling acacia tree. Natalia watched through her camera as Shani groomed Mosi, her rough tongue carefully cleaning around his wounds. The tender scene touched something deep in Natalia's heart. This story, she said softly, lowering her camera, it needs to be told the right way, not as something sensational, but as a reminder of how delicate this balance is. Dr. Kamau nodded approvingly. Conservation isn't just about dramatic rescues. It's about understanding these complex relationships. The peaceful moment shattered as a deep roar rolled across the savannah. Everyone tensed. Natalia grabbed her binoculars, scanning the horizon with Kofi. Through the heat waves rising from the ground, they spotted several dark shapes moving through the tall grass. The rival pride, Kofi confirmed grimly. They're gathering again? Dr. Kamau stood, his face serious. Mosi needs to move soon. Even with our presence, he must show strength in his territory or risk losing it all. He turned to the others. We need to find a way to help him relocate without causing more harm. The group huddled together, the weight of their next decision hanging heavy in the afternoon air. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the savannah as Natalia and Kofi huddled together, discussing their plan. They needed to guide Mosi to safety, but without causing him stress or fear. We'll stay behind him, Kofi explained quietly. Just enough noise to encourage him forward, not enough to startle. Natalia nodded, her camera ready to document this delicate moment. Dr. Kamau watched from near the vehicles, medical kit still at hand just in case. They started with soft clapping, the sound barely louder than rustling leaves. Mosi's ears twitched. Shani stood next to him, her body pressing gently against his side. When Kofi rattled some dry branches, Mosi lifted his head, alert but not alarmed. That's it, Natalia whispered. He's responding. With tremendous effort, Mosi pushed himself up on shaking legs. Shani stayed close, her shoulders supporting his weight when he wavered. Each step seemed to cost him, but he kept moving, driven by instinct and Shani's persistent encouragement. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Mosi's progress became steadier. The dense brush ahead promised safety, a natural fortress where the rest of his pride waited. Natalia captured these precious moments through her lens, amazed at how Shani matched each of Mosi's limping steps with patient determination. Look at them, she breathed. They're so in sync. Lions are social creatures, Dr. Kamau remarked softly. Their bonds run deeper than we often realize. Finally, just as twilight settled over the land, Mosi reached the thick vegetation. He disappeared into the brush with Shani at his side, finding refuge in the natural cover. In the distance, the rival pride silhouette stood frozen, perhaps sensing that their opportunity was slipping away. Dr. Kamau shouldered his medical bag. He's where he needs to be now. Nature will take its course. Natalia lowered her camera, feeling both elated and slightly sad. Time to go? Yes, Kofi agreed. We've done what we can. As they gathered their equipment, Shani emerged briefly from the brush. She stood watching them, her golden eyes reflecting the last rays of sunlight. It was a moment Natalia knew she'd never forget. The morning sun painted the Okavango Delta in shades of gold as Natalia Cruz settled back into her original campsite. Her hands moved automatically through the familiar motions of unpacking, but her mind wandered to the extraordinary events of the past few days. This spot, where Shani had first appeared like a ghost from the tall grass, now felt different, sacred almost. Sitting cross-legged beside her tent, Natalia clicked through the photos on her camera's display. Each image told a piece of their story. Shani's determined face as she led them to Mosi, Dr. Kamau's careful hands treating the wounded lion, the tender moments between the two lions. One photo particularly touched her heart, Shani nuzzling Mosi after he'd first managed to stand. "These aren't just wildlife photos anymore," she whispered to herself, touching the screen gently. As the morning warmed, Kofi's familiar figure appeared on the horizon. He walked with his usual easy grace, stopping to admire a soaring eagle before reaching her camp. "I wanted to say goodbye properly," he said, settling down beside her, "and to thank you for showing such respect for our wildlife." Natalia nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about how to tell this story. It needs to be more than just dramatic headlines about a lioness seeking human help." "You understand," Kofi smiled. "This isn't about sensation. It's about connection, about trust." He paused, looking out over the delta. "I'll share what happened with my village, but quietly. Stories like this can change hearts, teach people about conservation in ways facts and figures never could." Natalia reached for her satellite radio, adjusting the frequency to contact Dr. Kamau. The veterinarian's voice crackled through, still carrying its characteristic professional tone. "Mosi is stable," he reported briefly. "Shani hasn't left his side. The rival pride seems to have moved on." There was a pause, then he added with unexpected warmth, "You did good work here, Natalia." She smiled, thanking him before signing off. As she began packing her final pieces of equipment, Natalia felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had witnessed something rare and beautiful, not just a story of survival, but a testament to the profound bonds that could form between all living creatures. The Land Rover's tires crunched against the dusty road as Natalia steered away from the delta. Her hands gripped the wheel loosely, mind drifting back to that first morning when Shani emerged from the grass. The lioness's eyes had held such intelligence, such desperate determination. Not the mindless beast that sensational wildlife shows often portrayed, but a thinking, feeling creature who had chosen to trust. "I won't let you down, girl," Natalia whispered, glancing at her camera bag. The story deserved more than clickbait headlines about miraculous animal behavior. It needed to show the delicate balance of intervention and preservation, the complex dance between humans and wildlife. At a small village market, Natalia parked beneath a weathered acacia tree. The afternoon heat had thinned the crowd, leaving just a handful of vendors with their colorful wares. As she browsed the stalls for water and snacks, a carved wooden lion caught her eye. The artisan had captured something special in the animal's expression, a quiet dignity, a noble bearing. "You have good taste," said an elderly vendor, his smile warm and knowing. "The lion brings balance to our world. When the lions thrive, we all thrive." He wrapped the carving carefully in cloth. "They are not just animals to us, they are teachers of harmony." Natalia turned the package over in her hands, thinking of Shani's protective vigil over Mosi, of Dr. Kamau's careful intervention, of Kofi's deep understanding of the delta's interconnected web of life. The vendor was right. Every creature played its part in maintaining nature's delicate balance. As she drove onward, the setting sun transformed the landscape into liquid gold. Dust motes danced in her rearview mirror, and the delta seemed to shimmer like a mirage. Natalia felt a deep sense of purpose settling into her bones. Her photos wouldn't just tell a story. They would show people the true face of conservation, the real meaning of coexistence between humans and wildlife. She placed the wooden lion carving on her dashboard, a reminder of everything she had witnessed. The lessons of the Delta would stay with her, shaping not just her story, but her understanding of what it meant to truly respect the wild. Natalia sat at her desk, the soft hum of her computer filling the quiet morning air. Dozens of photos spread across her screen, each one a piece of the extraordinary story she'd witnessed. Her finger hovered over the mouse, carefully selecting images that captured the truth without sensationalism. There was Shani standing guard over Mosey's wounded form. The fierce protectiveness in her eyes spoke volumes. Another showed Dr. Kamau working methodically while Shani watched nearby, trust evident in her relaxed posture. Each photo told part of a larger story about cooperation and respect. "This one," Natalia murmured, selecting a particularly moving shot of Shani gently nuzzling Mosey as he struggled to stand. The morning light had caught them perfectly, highlighting their bond without dramatization. Later that afternoon, Natalia sat across from Marcus Chen, the Wildlife magazine's editor. His office walls displayed dramatic shots of predator-prey encounters and fierce battles. "These are remarkable photos," Marcus said, scrolling through her selection. "But couldn't we lead with the attack angle? Desperate lioness seeks human help. That would really grab readers." Natalia shook her head firmly. "This isn't about sensation or drama. It's about trust and balance, about how sometimes intervention can work alongside natural order." She leaned forward. "The real story is how Shani's intelligence led her to seek help, and how everyone, human and animal, worked together." Marcus tapped his desk thoughtfully. "You're passing up a chance for major publicity here." "I'm choosing integrity over clicks," Natalia replied quietly. "These animals trusted us. I won't betray that." After a moment, Marcus nodded. "All right, we'll run it your way. The conservation angle might actually resonate more deeply with our core readers." That evening, Natalia curled up in her favorite armchair, cradling a steaming mug of chamomile tea. The city lights twinkled outside her window, so different from the star-filled Delta skies. Her phone buzzed with Kofi's message about Mosey's recovery. She smiled, remembering the massive lion's determination to stand despite his wounds. The small wooden lion carving she'd bought sat on her windowsill, a reminder of the delicate balance between human intervention and wild spaces. The warmth of her tea matched the warmth in her heart. She'd done right by Shani and Mosey. Their story would inspire without exploitation, educate without sensationalism. Sometimes the quietest truths spoke the loudest. In a small gallery space downtown, Natalia adjusted the lighting on a striking photo of Shani standing guard over Mosey. The image captured the lioness's fierce determination. Her eyes locked on something beyond the frame. Natural light filtered through the gallery's skylights, casting gentle shadows across the carefully arranged photographs. "Just a bit to the left," she muttered, tweaking the frame's position. Each image told part of their journey, from Shani's first appearance at her camp to Mosey's gradual recovery. Below each photo, Natalia had crafted thoughtful captions that went beyond mere description. They spoke of difficult choices, of trust between species, and of nature's delicate balance. As evening approached, people began filtering into the gallery. Natalia noticed their reactions, the way they leaned in close to study details, their quiet murmurs of appreciation. The crowd grew steadily, filling the intimate space with an atmosphere of anticipation. Taking her place at the front of the room, Natalia cleared her throat. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice steady but touched with emotion. "What I'm about to share isn't just a wildlife photographer's adventure. It's a story about trust, about the complex relationship between humans and nature, and about the difficult decisions we face in conservation." She described Shani's unexpected appearance at her camp, the Lioness' desperate plea for help. The audience listened intently as she recounted Dr. Kamau's initial reluctance and eventual change of heart. When she spoke of the nights spent protecting Mosey from the rival pride, several people leaned forward in their seats. "We often think of wildlife conservation in black and white terms," she continued. "Don't interfere with nature. Let things take their course. But sometimes, like Shani showed us, nature itself asks for our help. The challenge lies in knowing when to act and when to step back." As the evening drew to a close, visitors approached Natalia one by one. A young student expressed how the story had changed her perspective on wildlife photography. An elderly gentleman shared his own experiences with animal conservation in Africa. "You've shown us something special here," one woman said, gesturing to the photographs. "Not just beautiful animals, but the heart of what conservation really means." Natalia smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. She had honored both the truth of the story and the dignity of its subjects. As the last visitors departed, she stood alone in the gallery, surrounded by images of trust, courage, and healing. Her work here felt complete, yet somehow like a beginning. Natalia sat at her desk, sorting through files for her latest wildlife project, when her phone buzzed. A message from Kofi lit up the screen. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened it to find a stunning photo. There was Mosey, his powerful frame moving with renewed strength through the tall grass. Shani walked beside him, their shoulders nearly touching. In the background, tiny shapes moved through the grass, cubs playing in the safety of their territory. "They're thriving," Kofi's message read. "The rival pride hasn't returned." Tears welled in Natalia's eyes as she studied the image. Mosey's wound had healed completely, leaving only a faint scar. But more than that, the photo captured the quiet confidence of a pride restored to full strength. Later that afternoon, Natalia opened her laptop and composed an email to Dr. Kamau. She attached the photo from Kofi, along with one of her own. A powerful shot of Shani standing guard over Mosey during those tense nights of recovery. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before typing. "Dear Dr. Kamau, I wanted to share this update and express my deepest gratitude. Your expertise saved Mosey's life, but you also taught me something valuable about when to act and when to step back. This photo reminds me of that delicate balance. Thank you for taking a chance that night." As evening settled in, her computer chimed with Dr. Kamau's response. His words were few, but meaningful. They belonged to their world. We did our part. Natalia leaned back in her chair, letting the words sink in. The soft glow of her desk lamp illuminated the framed photo on her wall, Shani emerging from the grass that first morning at her camp. She smiled, understanding now what Dr. Kamau meant. They had helped when needed, then stepped away to let nature take its course. That was the true heart of conservation. The latest issue of Wildlife Conservation Quarterly arrived at Natalia's door. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened to her article. Trust in the Wild, an extraordinary tale of lion bonds. The editors had given her story prominent placement, with her photos spread across 6 full pages. The sight of Shani's determined face, watching over Mosey, still stirred deep emotions. The article began with Shani's first appearance at her camp, but focused on the deeper themes of trust between species and the complex decisions conservationists face. She had carefully worded each paragraph to emphasize the delicate balance between helping and interfering with nature. Throughout the week, emails flooded her inbox. Wildlife photographers praised her restraint in documenting the events. Conservation experts highlighted how her story demonstrated the importance of careful, ethical intervention. One message particularly touched her. "Your article showed us that sometimes the animals themselves know when to trust humans. Thank you for telling this story with such respect," wrote a veteran park ranger from Kenya. The International Wildlife Protection Group requested permission to use her photos in their educational materials. "Your images perfectly capture the complexity of modern conservation," their email stated. Similar requests came from universities and nature centers, each wanting to share the story of Shani and Mosey's bond. That night, Natalia sat at her desk, methodically cleaning her camera lenses. The familiar ritual calmed her mind as she reflected on the impact her story was having. She placed each piece of equipment carefully in its padded case, handling them with the same gentle respect she'd shown to the lions of the Delta. Her gaze drifted to the handmade lion carving she'd bought in the village market. It sat on her desk now, a constant reminder of those intense days in the ravine. She picked it up, running her fingers over the smooth wooden surface, remembering the villagers' words about balance and harmony. She opened her laptop to check flight schedules to Botswana. This time she wouldn't bring her professional gear, just a small camera, perfect for personal memories. The Delta was calling her back, not as a storyteller, but as someone who had learned its deepest lessons about trust and respect. The early morning sun painted golden streaks across the Okavango Delta as Natalia stepped out of her modest tent. This time, her shoulders felt lighter without the weight of professional cameras and equipment. She had come back as a visitor, seeking only to witness the majesty of the land that had changed her life. "Welcome back," Kofi's warm voice carried across the camp. He approached with his familiar bright smile, arms spread wide in greeting. "The Delta has missed you." They embraced like old friends, and Natalia felt tears prick at her eyes. "I've missed it too. How are they?" "Ah," Kofi's eyes twinkled. "You'll see tomorrow morning. The Pride is doing well. Very well." The next dawn found them parked quietly near a watering hole, the engines silent as they waited. Mist rose from the water's surface, creating a dreamlike scene. Natalia lifted her binoculars, simple ones this time, meant for watching rather than documenting. "There," Kofi whispered, pointing toward a patch of tall grass. Natalia's breath caught in her throat. Mosi emerged from the grass, his stride confident and strong. The wound that had nearly claimed his life was now just a faint scar, barely visible beneath his thick mane. He moved with the authority of a ruler secure in his domain. Behind him, Shani appeared, and Natalia's heart swelled. The lioness looked magnificent, her coat gleaming in the morning light. But what made Natalia's eyes fill with tears was the sight of 3 small cubs tumbling after their mother, playing and pouncing on each other's tails. "Life finds a way," Kofi murmured beside her. Natalia watched through her binoculars as Shani settled near the water's edge, her cubs climbing over her playfully. Mosey patrolled nearby, occasionally glancing at his family with what seemed like pride. The scene was perfect, more beautiful than any photograph could capture. As the afternoon sun began its descent, Natalia finally lowered her binoculars. She felt a profound sense of peace, watching the pride thrive in their natural habitat. Kofi's hand came to rest on her shoulder, a gesture of shared understanding. Looking at Shani in the distance, Natalia silently thanked the lioness for that first morning when she had approached her camp. The trust Shani had shown had taught Natalia more about the delicate balance between humans and wildlife than any textbook ever could. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Natalia stood on a small rise overlooking the savannah. The golden light painted everything in warm amber tones, making the grass shimmer like waves of honey. Her hand absently touched the small lion carving in her pocket, a reminder of how much had changed since that fateful morning when Shani first appeared at her camp. "It's amazing," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. "One moment can change everything." The land stretched out before her, vast and eternal. Somewhere out there, Mosey's pride continued their ancient cycle of life, stronger for having survived their ordeal. But it wasn't just the lions who had been transformed. Natalia felt different too. Her approach to storytelling forever altered by the trust Shani had shown her. As twilight settled over the delta, Natalia and Kofi sat in comfortable silence on the hood of the vehicle. The first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, and a cool breeze carried the night sounds of Africa across the plain. A lion's roar echoed in the distance, deep and powerful. Another roar answered, Mosey's distinctive voice. Natalia smiled, recognizing the sound of strength and vitality in his call. The pride was marking their territory, carrying on as they had for generations, before humans ever witnessed their struggles. "Nature has its own rhythm," Kofi said quietly. "We just need to learn when to help and when to step back." When it was time to leave, Natalia started the engine with reluctance. As she steered the vehicle along the familiar track, movement caught her eye. There, silhouetted against the purple sky, stood Shani and Mosey. They were barely visible in the growing darkness, but their proud stance was unmistakable. Guardians of their domain, symbols of resilience and survival. Natalia's throat tightened with emotion as she watched them fade into the night. This place had taught her so much about the delicate balance between compassion and respect, between helping and allowing nature to follow its course. She knew now that the story she would tell would always honor that balance. If you enjoyed the story of Natalia, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.